LiberalViewer presents.
So welcome to the April 23rd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekend's 18 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political analysis show for you all tonight. I'll start off with some Real Time with Bill Maher political comedy clips as usual. There was no Saturday Night Live this week. And I'll have a couple Bill Maher political comedy and even some Real Time with Bill Maher political analysis, I would say, sprinkled into the other clips. But most of the clips, as usual, come from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. If you look down in the video description, I've put links to the sources of just about all the clips. You can watch a lot of Real Time with Bill Maher and the monologue that I'm going to show at the beginning. I'm taking a clip from the monologue. You can find the whole monologue as a free video on YouTube on the Real Time with Bill Maher YouTube channel. And it's also true for most of the news analysis shows from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets. That's also available down in the video description. There's also a link to this clip list of the 18 clips. You can kind of follow along. They're in two categories. It's basically Trump's first 100 days and then the first 100 days of the resistance. In the middle, there'll be a lot about immigration, and I'll do some legal analysis. People wanted legal analysis last week, so when I get to the immigration stuff in the middle, I'll do some legal analysis. But I want to start off, like I said, with HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher monologue last week covered the first 100 days, which was also a big topic on most of the Sunday morning news analysis shows, even though it's kind of this arbitrary deadline, the first 100 days. But as you'll see when I go through the news clips, Donald Trump promised a lot that he would get done in the first 100 days that he didn't really get done. And here is Bill Maher kind of making fun of that in his monologue last Friday night over here.
Forget the wall. We need to build a blackboard because these people are stupid. Trump's whole MO, if I can get this right after almost 100 days, seems to be plan A is just talk out of your ass. Oh, we can have much better health care, way less money. We can get rid of the debt very quickly. Wipe out ISIS very quickly. Okay, then he finds out that's all bullshit. Plan B, develop a policy based on whoever you just talked to. He said this week that he found out that Korea was complicated because he was talking to the president of China, and he said, and I quote, "After listening for 10 minutes, I realized it's not so easy." These are the parts I'm not making up. Our president is getting his talking points on Korea from China. Wasn't Omarosa around or some other expert?
So there you see that's Bill Maher making fun of how Donald Trump promised a lot, and in his first 100 days, he's not really getting much done. And that was covered, like I said, by various news outlets to differing extents. I think NBC and ABC did the best job. Fox News did the best job covering up what Donald Trump's previous promises were, as I'll show a little later. And then CNN and CBS, well, CNN kind of decided, I think, journalistically not to concentrate on it, maybe because it's an arbitrary deadline. And then CBS promised next week that they would cover it. And I'm going to show you all those networks' take on the first 100 days. As for Bill Maher's take, I think that there is something to the idea of Donald Trump listening to the last advisor and being, much more prepared on a subject after listening to the Chinese president for 10 minutes. That was actually something that happened before last week's show. But I do want to go through, like I said, the news clips. One thing that Bill Maher said at the very beginning, I showed how he was talking about how Trump's voters are stupid. That was a theme that he kept coming back to in the show, and I'll show a clip a little bit later where he specifically gets back to that subject, which is why I left that little snippet at the beginning of that last clip in. But here's NBC's Meet the Press talking about Trump's first 100 days, how both NBC and ABC had new polls showing that Trump is at historic low levels in terms of approval and trustworthiness. And he made all these promises and did not deliver on them, as NBC points out in the almost 4-minute clip that I will talk about with you after we watch it together here.
Political culture, and this morning we have our brand new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll to tell us just how Americans think the president is doing as we approach day 100. In short, not well. Just 40% of those polled approve of President Trump's job performance so far, 54% disapproving. That's a bit of a drop from the 44-48 split from just 2 months ago. And it's by far the lowest we've recorded at this stage of any presidency in our 25-plus year history of this poll. 35% say the president is off to a good or great start, while 64% say Mr. Trump is off to a fair or poor start. At the same point in his presidency, 54% said Barack Obama was off to a good or great start, while 46% chose fair or poor. And finally, 46% say they feel more hopeful with President Trump. 52% say they feel more doubtful. Compare that to President Obama's 64-30 split on that question as he approached the 100-day mark. Now, keep in mind, most of Mr. Trump's term is still ahead of him, so he has plenty of time to turn things around with voters. But for now, he's searching for the kind of big win that will allow him to declare 100-day victory.
What happens? No particular rush, but we'll see what happens.
On Friday, President Trump tried to minimize the 100-day benchmark, calling it a ridiculous standard in a tweet. But that didn't stop the president from announcing a big rally in Pennsylvania on Saturday night, the 100-day mark. And he's been scrambling to declare early success.
No administration has accomplished more in the first 90 days.
On the campaign trail, in a contract with the American voter, candidate Trump promised to introduce 10 specific pieces of legislation in his first 100 days and fight for their passage.
We're going to have the biggest tax cut since Ronald Reagan.
The Repeal and Replace Obamacare Act. Impenetrable, physical, tall, powerful, beautiful southern border wall. We will cancel every illegal Obama executive order.
But though Republicans control the White House and both chambers of Congress, they have failed to pass any significant piece of legislation. The Obamacare repeal Republicans promised for 7 years was yanked from the House floor. Mr. Trump's travel ban is stalled in the courts. And the Treasury Secretary has pushed the deadline for tax reform from the summer to the end of the year. The president's one big accomplishment, the confirmation of Supreme Court Justice Neil Gorsuch, was largely delivered by Senate Leader Mitch McConnell. In a new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, confidence in Mr. Trump's presidential qualities has eroded, even on the attributes where he performs best. He's down by 7 points since February on being firm and decisive, down 6 on changing business as usual in Washington. Just 25% of Americans give Mr. Trump a good rating on being honest and trustworthy. Now the president is scrambling for a legislative victory on health care, but signaling it might not get done.
Doesn't matter if it's next week. Next week doesn't matter.
Still, in an interview with the Associated Press, Mr. Trump promised to roll out a massive tax cut next week.
We'll be having a big announcement on Wednesday having to do with tax reform.
But Capitol Hill will be focused on funding the government, which will shut down at midnight on Friday, President Trump's 99th day in office, unless Congress can pass a spending bill. Compounding Mr. Trump's problems is a jittery Republican Congress, returning to Washington after 2 weeks of facing down constituents at town hall.
Yes or no on high-risk pools?
I want to make sure that you have health care.
Fuzzy answer.
And increasingly, Republicans have become comfortable criticizing their own president.
With the trips to Florida, I do wish that he would spend more time in Washington, D.C. That's what we have the White House for.
And joining me now.
So, like I said, I thought that Chuck Todd and NBC's Meet the Press laid out a good case. If you want to make a case that Donald Trump made all these promises in that contract, that was actually the last week of the campaign, if you recall. That was his, big closing argument, that he was going to do these 10 legislative things, get them introduced and fight for them in the first 100 days. And the only one that actually got introduced was health care, and that failed. Supposedly he's going to bring it back, and he's supposedly going to bring out tax reform this week in a mad rush before the 100th day, which is next Saturday. And then there's a possibility the government might shut down, which is what CNN ended up concentrating on. But before I get to the CNN and the CBS and Fox News clips covering this, I want to show how ABC also did a good job of laying out the broken promises. They started off with George Stephanopoulos at the very beginning of the show, giving the ABC poll that actually had very similar results to the NBC poll, which if two different polls tell you the same thing, either they have the same biases, I suppose you could argue, but it is two different data points from two independent corporate news outlets. So that's at least two is better than one, at least in terms of data points, as far as I'm concerned. And here's George Stephanopoulos giving those poll results, and then they talk about a lot of the same facts, and especially the broken promises, but it's George Stephanopoulos doing it in a back and forth conversation with their White House correspondent Jonathan Karl, and they do it in about a little over 4 minutes over in this clip.
Running for president, he broke all the rules and won. Being president, it turns out, a bit more complicated. And as he completes his first 100 days this week, even Trump seems conflicted. On Tuesday, he boasted of the best start of any president ever. By Friday, he was calling the 100-day benchmark ridiculous. By this time next week, he could be the first president in history to face a government shutdown in his first 100 days. Over the next hour, we're going to take a deep dive into President Trump's tumultuous start, what is working, what's not, what he must do now to make good on his promise of massive change. And we begin with some striking results from our brand new poll with the Washington Post. It finds Trump in a pretty deep hole, the worst approval ratings around the 100-day mark for any president in modern times. 42% of Americans give his performance a thumbs up, 53% disapprove. And as you see in this chart, no other president has been underwater like that. The average rating since Truman, 69 to 19. Remember, for most presidents, this is the honeymoon period. Over time, their ratings drift down. They rarely, if ever, go up. Right now, a majority, 53%, do think the president is a strong leader. But nearly 6 in 10 doubt his honesty, temperament, empathy, and judgment. 56% believe he just hasn't accomplished all that much in these first 3 months. One big bright spot for Trump, no buyer's remorse from the voters who won him the White House. 96% of his supporters stand by their vote. And get this, if a new election were held today, our poll shows that Trump would even beat Hillary Clinton in the popular vote. That finding is a flashing red light for Democrats. We're going to analyze their predicament today as well. Explore whether a president can govern at home when only his base gives him the benefit of the doubt, and what it means in the face of serious security threats overseas. Will the country stand by an unpopular president if crisis hits? First up, a view from the White House with our man in the front row of the briefing room every day, Chief White House Correspondent Jonathan Karl. And John, let's start with a reality check on this claim from the president.
No administration has accomplished more in the first 90 days. That includes on military, on the border, on trade, on regulation, on law enforcement.
Now, John, that is the kind of hyperbolic claim we've come to expect from the president. It's hard to think of what kind of standard it could be true on, but even by the standard he set for himself on the legislative front, he's not meeting the mark.
Well, on one hand, George, Donald Trump has truly shaken up Washington, and he has big plans for the rest of the year. But by the standards that he set for himself during the campaign, there is no question that he has fallen dramatically short in the first 100 days. Just take a look at this. Back in October, he offered what he called a contract with the American voter. This is 10 specific promises, 10 pieces of legislation that he promised to introduce and, quote, fight for their passage within the first 100 days of my administration. Well, George, only one of those has even been introduced, and that is repealing and replacing Obamacare, and obviously that hasn't passed. There is one area where there has been a significant impact, though, in the first 100 days, and that's on regulations. Rolling back regulations that Obama put in place, especially on the environment. His economic team believes this is already having an impact on business, and they believe that ultimately rolling back those regulations could even have more of an impact than tax reform. And George, you mentioned him saying that this is a ridiculous mark, but I've got to tell you, I am seeing a mad scramble in the West Wing to try to get points on the board before the 100-day marker. On one hand, they want to make another effort to pass health care. And then there's tax reform. You mentioned the promise that he made on Friday that he's going to unveil a plan for tax reform on Wednesday of next week. This shocked his own top advisors. The idea had been floated a few days earlier. They had agreed that they wouldn't do it yet. It wasn't ready. And then they heard him say it. clearly an indication that he wants to still get something done, something more done before they reach that 100th day.
And John, how about the White House?
So there you see that Jonathan Karl is reporting a lot of the same things you heard from Chuck Todd about how Trump is both downplaying and dismissing the 100-day thing while in the background they're scrambling to put points on the board, is something you'll hear from Fox News in just a minute. But that you also get the feeling from what Jonathan Karl just reported there, if that's true, that it must be really tough to work for Donald Trump, because it sounds like they had all these meetings and decided tax reform wasn't ready. Apparently tax reform isn't supposed to be ready till the end of the year instead of being ready in August. And well, then Trump decided, like, after they had meetings and all decided that they weren't going to introduce tax reform until the end of the year, he says, no, we're going to do it this week in the first 100 days. And you also saw that ABC did talk about the possible shutdown. And my favorite part of that clip, actually, I think you see George Stephanopoulos at least giving some skepticism to the Trump administration about halfway through that clip, where they showed Donald Trump, the same thing they showed on NBC, where he says, I've had the greatest accomplishments of any administration ever in my first 90 days or whatever. And George Stephanopoulos says, it's hard to think of any standard under which that statement might be true. And, I think that's kind of a phrase to keep in mind for a lot of the Trump administration. George Stephanopoulos should, and journalists throughout America should be saying some version of that phrase much more often, like in response to things the Trump administration says, because so many things they say, it's hard to think of any standard under which they might be true, as George Stephanopoulos said. And I want to get on to the next networks, how they covered the first 100 days, which for CBS, like I said, they didn't decide not to cover it. They decided to cover it really big next Sunday, including an interview with Donald Trump himself. And then it goes over from Sunday on Face the Nation to Monday with Gayle King and Norah O'Donnell, I think. And anyway, here's about 30 seconds from John Dickerson explaining how they're going to do the first 100 days next week on Face the Nation this morning here.
We'll get to this week's news in a moment, but first we want to tell you about next week's broadcast. Saturday marks the official 100th day of the Trump administration, and we'll be spending that day with the president. We'll interview him at the White House and then travel with him to a rally in Pennsylvania. The first part of our interview will air on Face the Nation next Sunday, and the rest on CBS This Morning on Monday, May 1st. That broadcast will originate live from the White House. Along with our interview, Charlie Rose, Gayle King, and Norah O'Donnell will be talking with top administration officials about the first 100 days and looking ahead to the next 100. But first, Congress is going...
So yeah, that's John Dickerson's brief report on what they're going to talk about the first 100 days next week. So I guess there'll be a lot to cover, and hopefully I'll be able to take some good clips of Donald Trump going on a Sunday morning show and getting tough questioning from John Dickerson. We can only hope next week. I guess we'll find out. But I also, before I go on, I wanted to point out I did get one of these super chat donations. Here it is from Gareth Carter for £2, and didn't even show any sort of comment as to some reason that reason to post with super chat, that some message they wanted to convey to all the viewers, but I really appreciate the super chat contributions. I don't know if anyone noticed from watching the recorded show last week, but it was not monetized, even though it wasn't rejected for monetization. It's just YouTube is not monetizing hardly any of my videos. Certainly not my live streams, the recorded versions of my live streams for the last couple weeks. So if you want to help me out, you can help me out like Gareth did with the super chat donation during the live show or during the recorded show. My Patreon link is down in the video description. I've gotten an additional 8 patrons this month so far, which I also really appreciate. I think I'm actually going to be redoing the patron levels. I'm running out of these hashtag LiberalViewer candles because the maker of those candles has kind of gone off the grid and posted a goodbye YouTube video this last week. Renetto, for anyone who remembers Renetto from like 8-10 years ago as the king of YouTube back then. So I may set up a couple, like a $5 and $10 level where you get like stickers or maybe one of these ACLU constitutions, or I don't know, I haven't quite thought it through yet, but just to try to, my YouTube revenue has really dropped and I still like to be able to monetize my weekly effort, so I wanted to thank Gareth Carter for that contribution, and the Super Chat contributions definitely help, and I definitely helped last week for a video that was not monetized hardly at all by YouTube, even though it got like 20,000 views, but I think 500 views were monetized, so sorry, that's my end of my complaining about my YouTube ad revenue, and now I'm going to go back to complaining about the corporate media outlets that didn't really cover Donald Trump not fulfilling his 100-day promises. Over on CNN's State of the Union, Dana Bash was the guest host for Jake Tapper, and she barely mentioned the 100-day thing. I think they may have decided it was an arbitrary deadline, kind of like the Washington Post put out this article saying that it's not a good indicator of whether a president is going to be successful or not. And that's actually true, but it was Donald Trump who hyped the 100-day deadline, or the first 100 days as some significant deadline, both during his campaign, at the end of his campaign, and during his transition. And you'll see here Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union mostly focuses on the government being on the verge of a shutdown. In fact, that's the State of the Union this week, on the verge, in this short clip from State of the Union this morning here.
In Washington, where the state of our union is on the verge. There's a showdown brewing in Washington as President Trump begins the week that will mark his first 100 days in office. Congress has until Friday to approve a new spending bill and keep the government running. But there's a sticking point, that big, beautiful wall the president promised to build along the border with Mexico. The White House seems to be signaling that funding for the wall must be included in the spending bill, something that would be hard for Democrats to swallow. Could Trump's signature campaign promise bring the government to a screeching halt? Let's ask Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly.
Oh, and I actually am going to have a clip from Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly a little bit later. But first, like I said, I want to show the final clip of the network coverage of the first 100 days. This is, I think, the most dishonest coverage was on Fox News Sunday, even though Fox News Sunday is supposedly straight news on Fox News. And it starts with Chris Wallace's introduction, where he talks about, in this introduction, that they're putting, that Donald Trump wants to put points on the board. That's what I was saying earlier. And then they go to Kristin Fisher, this new Fox News female reporter they've been using on Fox News Sunday recently. And she, I think I showed her a couple weeks ago, and she also talks about Trump's first 100 days. And you'll hear some of the same facts you heard from ABC and NBC, but there's no comparison to the promises. They never really delineate what those promises were that Trump made in his contract the last week of the campaign. And then they also talk about his promise to build the wall, but not his promise that Mexico would pay for it. That also never came up on Fox News Sunday or in this specific report. Like I said, Chris Wallace to Kristin Fisher over here.
The nation's capital seems headed for a major logjam this week as President Trump tries to put points on the board before he reaches 100 days in office next Saturday. The president is talking about getting a bill through the House to repeal and replace Obamacare, and he says he'll unveil a plan for massive tax cuts. But lawmakers returning from a 2-week break face a more urgent deadline, keeping the government open. In a moment, we'll speak with White House Budget Director Mick Mulvaney. But first, let's bring in Kristin Fisher at the White House with a look at the president's push for a big win ahead of that symbolic 100-day mark. Kristin.
Chris, there's really only two paths for President Trump to score a big legislative win before his first 100 days are up. He can either get funding for his border wall included in the spending bill, Or he can convince House Republicans to vote on a revised plan to replace Obamacare. Problem is, Democrats say funding for the border wall is a deal breaker, and House Speaker Paul Ryan says he doesn't have the votes or the time to pass health care reform by Friday. In a conference call with House Republicans yesterday, Speaker Ryan said his top priority this week is avoiding a government shutdown. Negotiations now hinge on if President Trump will insist that the spending bill include a $1 billion down payment on a border wall. When asked on Friday if he would sign a bill without it, President Trump said, quote, "I don't know yet. People want the border wall. My base definitely wants the border wall." But his Homeland Security Secretary, who toured the border last week, told CNN this morning that he believes the president will not sign a bill that doesn't include funding for his most famous campaign promise.
Goes without saying that the president has been pretty straightforward about his desire and the need for a border wall. So I would suspect he'll do the right thing for sure, but I will suspect he will be insistent on the funding.
And President Trump is now adding tax reform to next week's to-do list. Treasury officials are racing to finalize his plan for massive tax cuts in time for Wednesday's announcement, a deadline that's self-imposed by President Trump. Chris?
Kristin Fisher.
A deadline self-imposed by President Trump, you see from Kristin Fisher at the end there, but what they never really said was how did he impose that deadline, and specifically didn't point out the way ABC and NBC did, that he made these 10 promises in the last week of the campaign, and he is basically not fulfilled any of them. He promised 10 legislative priorities that would be introduced and fought for in the first 100 days, and one, healthcare, was introduced, I guess fought for, and then failed. That healthcare is his success from the first 100 days, but you would never know it, like from that story from Fox News, or when Chris Wallace questioned Mick Mulvaney, the director of the Office of Management and Budget for the Trump administration. He mentioned how Trump talked about the first 100 days in the transition without ever mentioning that in the last week of the campaign he made these specific 10 promises, and then he lets Mick Mulvaney get away with all this spin that I will talk about with you after we watch that clip together over here.
About the president's 100th day, which coincidentally would also happen on Saturday, the day you might get a government shutdown. On Friday, the president tweeted this: "No matter how much I accomplished during the ridiculous standard of the first 100 days, and it has been a lot, including Supreme Court, media will kill." But it's Mr. Trump who has been talking since the transition about the 100-day marker. Here's just a sample.
Today, I would like to provide the American people with an update on the White House transition and our policy plans for the first 100 days. I got it done in the first 100 days. That's even nice.
I don't think that there is a presidential period of time in the first 100 days where anyone's done nearly what we've been able to do.
Is that why the president is in such a rush to get the Obamacare repeal and replace, and we'll talk about that in a moment, passed this week to unveil his big tax cut because he wants to have more to show for his first 100 days?
I go back, if you look at that tweet, what it says is regardless of what we would do, it would still be downplayed by the media, some media, not all. And I think he's right about that. What I think folks don't realize is that we've signed more legislation into law in the first 100 days than anybody in the last 50 years. We've put out more executive orders than any previous administration in the last 50 years. And importantly, these are not creating new laws. Most of these are laws getting rid of other laws, regulations getting rid of other regulations. We're reducing the role of government in your life during the first 100 days, and we're doing so on truly a historic basis. Then you add Justice Gorsuch. No president has ever had a Supreme Court justice confirmed in the 100 days, and we're talking about historic accomplishments by this administration in the first 100 days, but all anybody wants to talk about is health care.
Well, I'm going to talk about something other than
And Chris Wallace then changes the subject, lets Mick Mulvaney get away with, that was like complete spin. And the reason he could get away with it is because Chris Wallace never set up what the actual promises were for the first 100 days. He said they were from the transition, never laid out those 10 legislative priorities that were supposed to be introduced in the first 100 days from the last week of the campaign, and you heard Mick Mulvaney get away with that. Well, he said that it would be spun by the media, and that's definitely true. Of course, not all the media, which is like, not you, Fox News, because you're spinning things our way. And that, you know, I've been watching Fox News since I was thinking maybe they would move more towards the center with Roger Ailes gone, and now, of course, Bill O'Reilly's gone, which I'll talk about a little bit after I show a clip of Bill Maher and S.E. Cupp briefly discussing that a little bit later. But Fox News has definitely moved more pro-Trump. It's very difficult to find anything that runs on Fox News other than the Shepard Smith show that doesn't sound like it was written by the press secretary and, you know, written by Sean Spicer and Kellyanne Conway and the Trump administration, and like given to Fox News to read. It's pretty uncanny, and most of what you heard on Fox News, well, I'll show you one thing that's a little bit confrontational when I get to the resistance, but I'll also explain why it's not as confrontational as it could be. But as I have been pointing out from those last two Fox News clips, they never mentioned what in the news report at the beginning, or that questioning of Mick Mulvaney, which is both in the first segment, that Donald Trump had made these 10 promises in the last week of the campaign. They finally did briefly mention it in the panel discussion, like 40 minutes into the show, and but you saw how the ABC and NBC reports, they like showed the promises and then they showed what the promises were. Here you'll see Chris Wallace, like, you can't tell what the promises are, and he says, well, you know, more were not introduced than were introduced, but like I said, only one was even introduced. Healthcare, that's supposedly the success because they introduced it and fought for it, but it's a pretty big failure. And here's Chris Wallace finally mentioning the contract, but not really in this clip.
Who are getting really tired of our talking about the 100 days. I want to point out that candidate Trump, during the campaign, issued a contract with American voters. Let's put it up on the screen. And in this, he talked about all of the things he said he was going to get done in the first 100 days. Some of it he has done, more of it he hasn't. Chuck, how do you score what the president?
So yeah, that is because from those previous two clips, I thought I was going to be able to argue that Fox News never even mentioned the 10 promises. But then 40 minutes into the show, that is that's it. That's all the mention of the 10 promises on Fox News Sunday this morning that Donald Trump made as to what was he was going to accomplish in the first 100 days. You saw them laid out very clearly by ABC and NBC. Fox News, not so much. And I also, to give NBC credit, they had on Reince Priebus from the Trump administration, the chief of staff, and Chuck Todd actually went through and he described the 10 promises specifically to Reince Priebus, and you'll see he tries to claim that they're really making progress and it's not a good metric the first 100 days, and he tries to wiggle out of it, but at least, except for one of them, I think, which I will discuss after we watch it together, I think Chuck Todd sets up the 10 promises pretty well, and then you can judge Reince Priebus's answer for yourself over in this clip.
Good to have you here. Look, the president did tweet this on Friday. No matter how much I accomplished during the ridiculous standard of the first 100 days, it has been a lot, parentheses, including SC, I assume he means Supreme Court, media will kill. And maybe that'll be your response to my question here, but just before the election, I want to put up, he made these legislative promises in the first 100 days: tax reform, offshoring of jobs, infrastructure, school choice, health care, child care, immigration, ethics reform, more funding for the military, and dealing with crime and drugs. All of them were supposed to be legislative action that was announced, not necessarily the expectation that any of it be passed, but only one of those legislative priorities has even come close to a vote: health care. Why does he say it's a ridiculous standard and yet promise all this action before day 100?
All right, so let me try to unpack that, Chuck. I mean, first of all, if you look at the promises he made on immigration, you have border crossings down by 70%. You look at TPP, one of the first executive orders the president signed was getting out of TPP. You look at ethics, that was one of the bullet points you had. Every employee of the West Wing signed an ethics pledge that said you're not going to lobby for 5 years after you leave this place, and you're never going to lobby for a foreign country. Look at Neil Gorsuch, first 100 days, a Supreme Court justice is sworn in, first time since 1881. And if you just give me 1 minute, and I won't drone on, but this idea about major legislation not being passed within the first 100 days. Barack Obama had a pre-baked stimulus package that started in October of the election year, which was passed in February. It was pre-baked. George Bush didn't get any major legislation until June. Clinton, August 10th. Bush 41, a year and a half later. Reagan, August 13th. Carter, 658 days after he took office. Nixon, 1 year. Johnson, 225 days. Here's the deal. The president signed over 28 bills already. Healthcare may happen next week. It may not. We're hopeful it will. As far as borders, you said the military. We have right now in the CR negotiating one of the biggest increases in military spending in decades. So he is fulfilling his promises and doing it at breakneck speed.
All right, but let me give you one stand.
So I don't know. I didn't buy Reince Priebus's answer there, and like I said, I thought Chuck Todd did a good job of laying out the promises at the beginning there. I was actually reading the live comments along the way. I noticed I got a couple more super chat donations. One from DJ POB. I don't know how there's some way I'm supposed to pronounce it. I'm not sure. That was just keep up the good work, which I appreciate. And then I got a question from Nadis Crad. If I don't know, is that how you pronounce that? That I was gonna try to briefly answer to the extent I can. Here's that. Asking why the ACLU is fighting Wolfpack, which is the Young Turks' effort to get money out of politics. And first of all, I don't speak for the ACLU. I'm a volunteer activist for the ACLU, but the ACLU has like professional communication staff who speak for the ACLU, and on rare occasions, I do get empowered for local issues to speak for the ACLU, and this is not one of those times. But I think on the ACLU website you can find blog entries and even letters to Congress about constitutional amendments to amend the First Amendment, and that's what Wolfpack is in favor of. And I know the ACLU basically does oppose changing the First Amendment, a constitutional amendment, but there's a lot of diversity within the ACLU about campaign finance reform and different ways that money can be kept out of politics, especially through public financing. I know the ACLU supports that, but like I said, I don't speak for the ACLU. I just know, but if you go on the ACLU website, you can find all those things I just mentioned. So I hope that helps answer that question. And that's basically the last clip on the first 100 days that is basically about the 10 promises, except the one thing I'm going to focus on at the end of the first 100 days topic and the beginning of the resistance topic is immigration. I mentioned that at the beginning because one of the promises that Donald Trump made, I don't think it was even the first 100 days. I think it was supposed to be day one. He was going to get rid of all of President Obama's illegal executive orders. And one of those supposedly was what they call DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals is what DACA stands for. People sometimes call those childhood arrivals dreamers. They're people who were brought to the United States as children, not through the legal immigration process, so they're undocumented immigrants, but through no fault of their own, because a lot of them have grown up in the United States even thinking they were American citizens, or certainly thinking of themselves as Americans, and a lot of them don't speak the language of their supposed country of origin. So deporting them would be quite a disservice, and I actually, as a pro-immigrants rights activist, have worked with and gotten to know several people who fall into this category, and I think it would be a great loss to our community and our country to get rid of people. There used to be a bipartisan consensus. That's where the DREAM comes from, the DREAM Act, which was a bipartisan act in Congress before all this anti-immigrant hysteria that was supposed to give legal status to people who fit in this category. Now there's something in Congress called the Bridge Act, which is just a way to turn DACA, this executive order that gives them like work permits and the ability to work and go to school, that would make that a law passed by Congress. Well, that was a very long introduction to the question of, well, is Trump getting rid of DACA? Is he deporting dreamers? There was one dreamer who was deported, and it's kind of disputed as to whether he was deported because he was in Mexico or had just been in Mexico, or whether he was in California and had been in California for a long time. And that this came up with both Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, and the Secretary of Homeland Security on a couple different shows. I'm going to start with Jeff Sessions basically saying he's contradicting President Trump, who said that these dreamers should, rest easy, but he cannot finish answering this question without saying, well, they are deportable, and if we find them, we are going to deport these kids or these dreamers who've been here since, some of them since they were like 1 year old, 2 years old. It's pretty much a travesty. But here's Jeff Sessions on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos talking about this very issue and whether Donald Trump is going to get rid of it. He hasn't gotten rid of the executive order, but he's not really enforcing it, and they're just sending mixed, confused messages, as you can see over in this clip.
But in your discussions with your counterparts in Mexico, they've given no indication at all that the Mexican government is prepared to pay a single cent for this wall.
Well, I don't expect the Mexican government to appropriate money for it, but there are ways that we can deal with our trade situation to create the revenue to pay for it, no doubt about it.
Let's go on the situation with the Dreamers, those immigrants who were brought here as children. The president has said they should rest easy. Some of his conservative supporters, including Mark Krikorian, are saying that's a broken promise from the president. Let's listen.
During the campaign, President Trump had said he was, going to end that on day one because it's an unconstitutional action by the president. And, of course, he's right. It's illegal. And they've done nothing to it. They've done absolutely nothing.
He goes on to say that work permits are still being issued to Dreamers who didn't have them before. So is he right when he says this promise has been broken?
Well, I think the president is honoring his promise to end the lawlessness at the border. The first thing we need to do is to stop the additional flow of illegal people into our country. Many of these are involved in criminal enterprises, hauling drugs and that kind of thing. We need to end that. And then we've got to wrestle with what to do about people who've been here a long time. But I would say that the president is honoring his commitments to the American people to fix this border, and we're going to stay at it. The Border Patrol is working very hard, and so is the Department of Justice. We're going to back them up.
Even though he hasn't kept this specific commitment right there, the president did say, as I said this week to the Associated Press, that the Dreamers should rest easy. He's not going after the Dreamers. That's his policy. He said, is it the policy of the Justice Department?
The Homeland Security has primary jurisdiction there. Their first and strongest priority, no doubt about it, is the criminal element that we have in our country that have come here illegally. So they're focusing primarily on that, and there's no doubt the president has sympathy for young people who were brought here at early ages.
So they can rest easy?
Well, we'll see. I believe that everyone that enters the country unlawfully is subject to being deported. However, we don't have the ability to round up everybody, and there's no plans to do that. But we're going to focus first, as the president has directed us, on the criminal element, and we've got to get that under control.
Your Justice Department this week sent a letter to several cities and the state of California, these so-called sanctuary cities, warning that they're putting their federal funding at risk if they don't begin to cooperate more with the federal government. The Attorney General of the state of California has responded to that, Xavier Becerra. He's coming up on our program next. And he says that federal threats to take away resources from law enforcement or our people in an attempt to bully states and localities into carrying out the new administration's unsound deportation plan are reckless and jeopardize public safety. Your response?
It's nothing reckless, it's nothing extreme about saying if someone comes through our country unlawfully and commits a crime, another crime in the country, that they should be deported. That's what the law says. You shall be deported. So it also says that state and local governments cannot bar their police and law enforcement officers from sharing information with the federal government. In other words, if a person commits a crime in Los Angeles, or in the case of Kate Steinle, San Francisco, and an individual there is released multiple times, and he comes back to San Francisco because it's a sanctuary city and commits a murder, that's the kind of situation that person should have been deported previously and not allowed to return. There's nothing extreme or unreasonable about that. I urge our mayors and our politicians to listen to their law officers. Let's work together. Let's cooperate between the federal and state authorities. Let's remove dangerous criminals from America. It only makes common sense.
That letter did raise the ire of one
So that's Attorney General of the United States Jeff Sessions sending mixed messages, as I pointed out before I showed the clip, where they aren't actually rescinding this executive order, but they're not saying they won't deport people who this executive order about deferred action for childhood arrivals to give work permits or give some sort of legal status, some sort of paperwork to people, dreamers who were brought here as children through no fault of their own, have grown up in the United States, even though they're undocumented immigrants. And I thought Jeff Sessions' answer there was, it's really cruel because it's a political answer where they're trying to appease their base, but not get the bad press, I guess, from deporting. The whole Dreamer thing, like I said, it has bipartisan support. That it's really the problem from Congress, and that's what I've heard the Secretary of Homeland Security, John Kelly, you saw that in the clip I showed from him last week, where he blamed Congress en masse for not making the laws better and not like creating a legislative solution. They didn't pass the DREAM Act. They didn't pass, well, maybe they'll pass the Bridge Act, which would basically give these dreamers legal status but not a path to citizenship, which I don't know why we wouldn't want these dreamers to be citizens. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. But I have one more clip in the first 100 days section here. And the next clip after that is going to be the California Attorney General, Xavier Becerra, responding to what the U.S. Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, said about him in that last clip. But first I want to show John Kelly, the Secretary of Homeland Security, talking to Dana Bash on CNN's State of the Union. Is that? Yeah, basically about the same topic and sending the same cruel message for political reasons, saying, we're not targeting these DACA people, these dreamers, but we could still deport them because we're trying to appease our base but not get bad press on deporting people who are basically Americans. But I will read your comments in the live comments and also, of course, the recorded show comments later. But I will check out your live comments, what you think about dreamers and DACA and Trump's confusing, cruel mixed messages he's sending to these DACA dreamer recipients. Or after I'll check out your comments while we're watching Secretary of Homeland Security try to square the unsquareable circle, talking to Dana Bash on CNN's State of the Union this morning here.
Talk about some of those problems, and one of them is the question of what to do about the young immigrants known as dreamers. The president told the Associated Press on Friday that people who were brought to this country, to the U.S. illegally as children should, quote, rest easy about his immigration policy. And yet, Attorney General Jeff Sessions had this to say. Take a listen.
Everybody in the country illegally is subject to being deported. So people come here and they stay here a few years and somehow they think that they're not subject to being deported. Well, they are.
So, Secretary Kelly, which is it? Are these dreamers subject to being deported, or should they rest easy, as the president said?
Well, I'd certainly go with what the president said, but the point I think the Attorney General was making is they are here unlawfully and are subject to deportation. That's what the law says. Now, what we actually do is another story. And as I say, we are not targeting, my organization has not targeted these so-called dreamers, DACA. And we have many, many more important criminals to go after and get rid of, not the DACAs.
So just to be specific, what is the president saying to you, and what is he communicating that he wants you and your department to do? Does he want you to go after these dreamers, or is he explicitly saying, leave them alone, don't target them?
Yeah, the president told me to do two things. He told me to secure the southwest border, or all of our borders, and of course focusing now on the southwest border, and to take the worst of those that are in our country illegally, take them, look for them, and deport them. So that's what I'm doing.
At a recent press conference, the LAPD chief, Charlie Beck, said there's actually been a 25% drop in reports of rape among the city's Latino population since the beginning of 2017, and a 10% drop in reports of domestic violence, with no such similar drops among other groups. Listen to what the chief said.
Imagine a young woman. Imagine your daughter, your sister, your mother, your friend, not reporting a sexual assault because they are afraid that their family will be torn apart by doing so.
Mr. Secretary, he is arguing that your Get Tough policy is making people less safe, rather. What's your response?
Well, certainly the police chief is a hero in my mind. I mean, we're obviously locally where the rubber meets the road. But, you know, he's got his job to do, I've got my job to do. And as I've said repeatedly, Dana, the illegal aliens that we're going after are not, if you will, simply here illegally. We're actually going after the very people that the sheriff references in terms of criminals that happen to be here also illegally. And I would just highlight the fact that, you know, you can report crimes and not give your name. I mean, the 911 process is anonymous if you want it to be. But again, I don't have facts and figures. I haven't looked at it. I hear this a lot, that the reports are down and all that. I would just, again, tell the illegal immigrant community, if you're simply here illegally, we don't really have the time to go after you. We're looking for bad men and women. And we're doing that very, very effectively.
I just want to be clear. You are using this forum to send a message to women who are raped, other people who are abused, victims of domestic violence, that they should still feel comfortable to come forward and report that crime?
I think it's their duty to do that. But yes, they should feel comfortable doing it. We are not going after people who are victims. We are not going at, well, I would say that if they're also criminals, that's a different story. But if they're simply here illegally and are the victim of a crime, then they should report that crime.
The Pentagon spent more.
So I think that was a good line of questioning from Dana Bash on CNN, especially following up with the sheriff from Los Angeles talking about how it is a public safety issue not having local law enforcement enforcing federal immigration law, because most undocumented immigrants have not committed any real crime or any crime at all. I noticed while I was watching that clip, I promised I would look at the live comments. Here's one from someone named I'm Jack, I think, asking this question. Is an illegal immigrant a criminal? Well, somewhere between 40 and 60% of the people who are in the United States without documentation, undocumented immigrants, somewhere between 40 and 60%, so might be most, or it might be, a little bit less than half, are here overstaying their visas. And overstaying your visa is a civil violation. It's not a crime, so that doesn't make you a criminal. Being in the United States as an undocumented immigrant, also not a crime, doesn't make you a criminal. Entering the United States illegally is a misdemeanor, not a felony, but that actually is a crime. So if you illegally cross the border, like if you sneak across the border, that is a misdemeanor. That actually is a crime. But somewhere between 40 and 60% of the undocumented immigrants did not commit a crime getting here and are not committing a crime by being here. Now, they may engage in other criminal activity to get a job, like false social security number or that kind of thing, and that is actually enough to get you deported under the Trump administration, which I think, violent criminals, that's one thing, but people who are just trying to survive, who've been here 20 years, who have American citizen children, that if they've only committed non-violent misdemeanors by crossing the border illegally or using a fake social security number, that that shouldn't be deportable. But that's my opinion. You can let me know your opinion down in the comment section. And that's the last clip, like I said, on the first 100 days topic from the Trump administration. But now I have the secondary topic of the first 100 days of the resistance, and I'm actually going to start with a couple immigration clips on that topic. The first one being, is it a couple or just one that's... no, it's just one clip on immigration. This is, as I promised before, the California Attorney General responding to the U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who has promised to cut off sanctuary cities from federal funding if they don't stop harboring illegal immigrants or whatever. Well, here you can see, you heard what Jeff Sessions said. Here is Xavier Becerra, the Attorney General of my state, California, actually coming from Sacramento on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, explaining how California is not going to be bullied by the Trump administration, that the Constitution of the United States here is on our side, and I will give my additional legal analysis after you listen to Xavier Becerra talking to George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
General Jeff Sessions, first of all, on that issue of sanctuary cities, following up on that letter he sent to you and several cities on Florida, he's calling your policies reckless, and he's not backing down at all, threatening the funding that's coming to your state.
We're ready. We have been abiding by federal law for quite some time before Jeff Sessions became the Attorney General. We're going to continue to abide by federal law and the U.S. Constitution, and we're hoping that the federal government will also abide by the U.S. Constitution, which gives my state the right to decide how to do public safety. That's not their responsibility under the U.S. Constitution.
What he said
fully
is
respect that they have the responsibility to enforce immigration law. So we're in the business of public safety. We're not in the business of deportation.
You heard him. He's saying, especially in California, you're not fulfilling that duty. Pointed up the murder of Kate Steinle.
He can show us how we're not doing that right now, and I will tell you that we can prove anywhere we need to, whether court of public opinion or court of law, that we are protecting our people. That's why California today is the 6th largest economy in the world. We created more jobs than number 2 Florida and number 3 Texas combined, and we're doing it by keeping families together, not separating them.
Well, there does seem to be some confusion on the administration's policy towards the Dreamers right now. We heard President Trump say earlier this week that they should rest easy. It's not his policy to go after them. But we also just heard the Attorney General saying right there that everyone who is in this country in an undocumented way is vulnerable to deportation.
Yeah, it's not clear what we can trust, what statement we can believe in, and that causes a great deal of not just anxiety, but confusion, not just for those immigrant families, but for our law enforcement personnel. We're in California trying to just continue to move forward to create those jobs. We just made a major investment in building our roads and bridges and fixing our highways, while the federal government and the administration keep talking about doing infrastructure. We're doing it, but it sure makes it tough to be able to move forward and predict what's going to happen, at least coming from Washington, D.C., when we're trying to continue to move forward. It's very difficult, and I can understand why any dreamer or any immigrant family or anyone on the streets who's policing our streets to keep us safe is uncertain about what Donald Trump and Attorney General Sessions are talking about.
One of the cases in the news this week, this man Juan Montes, who he says he was picked up by border agents inside the state of California. They dispute that right now, saying that he was arrested after he came back in from Mexico. Do you have any independent information on that?
Not really, George. And as you said, the facts still are in dispute. What I'd like to do, and I've been trying to reach out to Attorney General Sessions and to DHS Secretary Kelly to get a sense of really what is their policy when it comes to the Dreamers. We have a policy in place that the president has today not changed, and so we'd like to know, is it in fact a policy of this president and this administration and this Attorney General Sessions to abide by the DACA policy that allows Dreamers to continue to go to school, to go to work, to believe that they're not going to be out there and be apprehended by ICE agents simply because they look like people who weren't born here.
You're just coming off.
If you can figure that out.
You're just coming off 24 years.
I don't know. Can you tell what someone who's born here looks like? Like Xavier Becerra said, I don't think you can, but I think he made a good argument that what Jeff Sessions and John Kelly said in those previous clips is really confusing and harmful to these DACA recipients, the Dreamers. They don't really know whether they should rest easy or if they're deportable. And as far as the sanctuary city issue, I wanted to, I held up the Constitution before, and I said that Xavier Becerra was going to say the Constitution is on our side. Well, there are actually two parts of the Bill of Rights that give states a lot of power in this area. One is the Fourth Amendment that says that in order to detain someone, you need probable cause and an arrest warrant from a judge, unless there are exigent circumstances. And what the Immigration and Customs Enforcement does is they send these letters called ICE detainers to local law enforcement and say, please, if you come in contact with this person, hold them for no more than 48 hours just as a favor to us because we think they might be deportable. But that is not probable cause and a warrant from a judge. So that violates the Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Just look it up yourself. Then there's the 10th Amendment that reserves powers to the states, and there's a Supreme Court case written by, the opinion is written by Antonin Scalia, and it has to do with a federal gun control law. It's called Prince versus the United States, and it said if you set up a federal bureaucratic system, it can't commandeer local law enforcement to implement that system. In that case, it was a gun control legislation where they're supposed to do all this bureaucratic stuff to further federal gun control. But there have been federal circuit courts, like the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, and I think it was the Galarza case, that found that also applies in immigration, since it's not a criminal system, it's a civil bureaucratic system, that the immigration civil system can't commandeer local law enforcement and make them carry out their their whole bureaucratic system. And that's why the Fourth Amendment and the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, look them up yourself, give states and sanctuary cities, or a sanctuary state like California, like Xavier Becerra was talking about, the local law enforcement has a lot of power under the Constitution not to become immigration enforcement agents, and that's also good for public safety because then immigrants will report rapes or domestic violence, or if they're witnesses to crime, they won't be afraid to talk to local law enforcement. So I wanted to make all those arguments before I move on to some other clips about the first 100 days of the resistance to Trump. And the first clip I want to show is actually a sort of token Republican resistor. This is James Lankford, a senator from Oklahoma, and I don't know, he's a very weak resistor, I think. And this is Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday talking to him, and he calls for the release of Trump's tax returns, but no subpoenas, no congressional action. He just wants to, use his moral suasion as a Republican senator to get Trump to release his taxes. But then you'll see, oh wait, sorry, I skipped an important clip which has to do with the Science March. I'll get to the James Lankford clip next. If you're looking for me to mess up clips, I didn't actually play the wrong clip, but that's the clip after next. The next clip is actually Nick Mulvaney talking to Chris Wallace. This is also from Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace. And he does ask some somewhat confrontational questions about the Science March, which took place yesterday. You notice I'm wearing a green shirt in honor of Earth Day. And Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday, even though he's a Fox News partisan journalist, he did actually ask about cuts to the EPA and to the NIH, but he never asked about the first 100-day promises, or, I'll talk about what I think is lacking in his questioning of the Director of Office of Management and Budget, Nick Mulvaney, after we watch that clip together over here.
Thousands of people held a march for science in cities across the country. You can see the crowds were really quite striking. And one of the things they're protesting are big budget cuts that the president is proposing. The administration wants a 20% cut, almost $6 billion for the National Institutes of Health, a 31% cut for the Environmental Protection Agency. Question, can you guarantee those folks, those tens of thousands of people who are marching, that those cuts will have no effect on medical research or on protection of the air and water we have?
Yes, the air that you breathe and the air that my triplets breathe and my kids drink is going to be just as clean even with those reductions. When we looked at those, we targeted those agencies, amongst others, for things of duplication of process, things that the government mission creep, for example, EPA doing stuff that it's not supposed to do. What we've made sure is the EPA will have enough money to perform its core function.
And you're saying that the $6 billion that you're taking out of NIH, or want to take out of NIH, that's going to have no impact on medical research?
It will certainly have some impact on medical researchers, but we don't think it will materially impact the quality of the research that's coming out.
And if they say, or environmentalists say, you're wrong?
My guess is a lot of people are going to say we're wrong, but step back and talk about what we did on the budget. We reprioritized, and what we said is defending the nation, including securing the southern border, is the primary function of this government. It should be a priority of this government under this administration, and funding for the National Institute of Health needs to take backseat to that.
Finally, I'm going to give you 30 seconds.
So when the Director of Office of Management and Budget, Nick Mulvaney, there guessed that a lot of people are going to say he's wrong, that was a good guess. I say, good guess, Nick Mulvaney. I also believe a lot of people are going to say you're wrong when you say cutting billions and billions of dollars from the budgets of the EPA and the National Institutes of Health, that is not going to in any way harm the environment or medical research. That you can tell me what you think down in the comment section, but I did not really buy that argument from Nick Mulvaney. You can, I don't know how you could disagree, but I have one more clip here from Fox News Sunday. This is Chris Wallace. You have to at least give him credit for bringing up the Science March and the cuts to the EPA and the NIH, but I don't think he did as good a job in this clip with Senator James Lankford. I saw down in the live comments people were saying that since I messed up the introduction to the clip. Everybody had to drink, so I don't know. This is my, here we go. But now I'm going to play the right clip of Chris Wallace questioning James Mulvaney on whether he is part of the resistance to Trump. And you'll see he makes this very bad analogy between asking for Trump's tax returns, and this is James Lankford, the senator from Oklahoma, asking for Trump's tax returns and asking for Barack Obama's birth certificate, and I'll discuss that and whether James Lankford is really a resistor to Trump after we watch that clip from Fox News Sunday together over here.
Let's talk about what seems to be a greater willingness among some Republicans in Congress, yourself included, to criticize this president. There are a dozen of you who have said the president should keep his promise and release his tax returns. There are some Republican senators and congressmen in border states who are really questioning whether or not you need a full border wall. And I want to play for you Senator Joni Ernst at a town hall meeting this week in Iowa. Here she is.
With the trips to Florida, I do wish that he would spend more time in Washington, D.C. That's what we have the White House for.
Senator, what's going on with this increased willingness of Republican members of Congress, including yourself, to criticize this president?
I think, quite frankly, it's what Republicans said we would do a few years ago when people challenged us and said, if you had someone in the White House of your own party, would you hold them to account the same way that you're holding President Obama account? You're finding out that's actually true, that Republicans are consistent to go both ways in this. Now, listen, in the town hall meetings that I've had in the last 2 weeks, and I've had 16 of them, in the town hall meetings that I've had in the last 2 weeks, I've heard some of the same argument, just with an opposite. Now people are saying they demand to see Trump's tax returns. 3 years ago, it was people saying they demand to see President Obama's birth certificate. 3 years ago, people were saying President Obama's traveling all the time, playing golf, and he's played more golf than any other president in history. Now I have progressive constituents saying that President Trump is out there traveling to Mar-a-Lago, and how much are his costs on it? So these same type of arguments are coming up back and forth, but I think what you're finding is Republicans are being consistent. They are playing it straight to say, if there's an issue, let's raise the issue regardless of who's in the White House, and be able to help solve the issues that we've got. So I don't see that as inconsistent for us.
There are new polls out today.
And you see there, Chris Wallace changes the subject to the polls and lets James Lankford get away with saying, oh, I think Republicans are being really consistent because, you know, we asked for Barack Obama's birth certificate and now I'm asking for the tax returns, although he, like I said, he didn't call for Congress to pass legislation or for any committees to subpoena the tax returns, just his moral suasion. And, I mean, I thought that whole answer was ridiculous, especially in terms of consistency. And he brought up the whole golf thing, like that is something where liberals are being inconsistent. And actually, over on HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher, I thought Bill Maher made a very strong argument that liberals are more consistent than, or I should say, Democrats more consistent than Republicans, based on Pew Research results, which, I mean, I've talked about how there are some problems with some of the Pew Research on what Muslims say in Muslim countries, but probably a little more accurate in this case. But I'm always a little skeptical about polls, but I'm not skeptical about the way Bill Maher really cross-examined S.E. Cupp until she finally submitted, or at least submitted for the moment, in admitting that Republicans are much more hypocritical on changing positions when the president changes from Democrat to Republican than Democrats have been. And this is about 4 minutes, and I think it's a really good rebuttal to what you saw James Lankford say on Fox News Sunday, a much better rebuttal than Chris Wallace gave, as I will discuss with you after we watch that together here.
Well, let's get back to the main topic. Why are Republicans so stupid? That, I think, was our main... No, I kid, of course, but, you know...
No, I actually get to ask this question all the time. I do. I ask, why are so many of your colleagues just stupid? And look, to be honest, I don't think they're stupid. I think it's kind of hard to get elected to Congress. I think what's lacking in Congress is not intelligence, it's courage. Because they all know the truth. They know what's going on. They just won't.
Maybe the politicians, But let me give you some Pew poll results on the voters, because there is one thing that drives me crazy is false equivalency. There is a giant difference between Democrats and Republicans, and I go after liberals all the time, and I will tonight. But feelings about key issues apparently depend entirely on the party that is in power. Republicans versus Democrats on the economy. This is according to the Pew people. For almost the entirety of the Obama presidency, current economic situation is good. Only 10 to 30% of Republicans said yes under Obama. Suddenly, with the same economy under Trump, it went from 31 to 61% because the magic man took over. Democratic views didn't change at all, 57 to 60. On bombing Syria, when Obama wanted to do it in 2013, 22% approval from Republicans. Now, after Trump did it, 86% approval. Democrats, same, 38 to 37 in 2013 versus now on bombing Syria. Income tax. Does the amount you pay seem fair to you? At the end of Obama, Republicans, only 39% said it was fair. They're paying the same thing a month later, 56% said it's fair. They are more tribal, I'm sorry, and they are less concerned with observable reality. That seems like there are facts in there that say that.
Well, let me just say a couple things. One, I think there's hypocrisy to go around. I'm not really sure where Democrats and liberals stand on leaks right now. I remember a little different treatment to Obama golfing than Trump golfing. Two, I don't think that mocking...
Trump golfs a lot more.
Obama plays less golf now, and he's not the president anymore.
Liberals told us that it didn't matter that the president was golfing so much. Now every story on the media is how much Trump is golfing. I'm just saying...
We don't like hypocrisy. When Trump criticized Obama for golfing, and now he golfs more than Obama, we see that as a problem.
I do too. I do too. Just let me finish. I do too, and that's my point. There's hypocrisy to go around, but the hypocrisy on the right has been incredibly disturbing and obvious. I don't have amnesia as a Republican. I remember when we thought it was kind of a bad deal to do all these executive orders. I remember when that was the thing we had. I remember, when we thought exploding the debt was no good, was no bueno. I didn't forget all of that.
Right.
And to see this amnesia now that there's an R in the White House is deeply, deeply disappointing.
So you would concur with these findings, that there is...
Hypocrisy?
Well, that the one party is more tribal and less concerned with what's real.
Well, no, as I said, I think there's liberal hypocrisy, too, and a difference in the way that...
Of course, there's always hypocrisy everywhere. But
okay, good, then we agree.
We don't agree.
Let me also just
We don't agree. We don't agree unless you say one party is way more tribal and way less concerned with reality.
Certainly right this moment, it definitely feels that way.
Thank you.
But let me also just say, Bill, and to Seth's point, let me just say, mocking conservative voters as dumb seems like a very bad strategy to win elections again.
And that was Representative Seth Moulton, a Democrat who was talking to S.E. Cupp there right at the end and agreeing that it's dumb to say Republicans are stupid, but that was something Bill Maher said over and over again. You saw at the beginning of that clip, and then at the beginning of the clip I showed at the beginning of the show from his monologue, that he came back to that topic a couple times, that Republicans are stupid because, and in a clip I'm not going to show, he said, when they deny climate change, when they deny the facts, it's fair to call them stupid. It's just, but S.E. Cupp and the Democratic representative there both agreed that it's not a good political strategy to call Republicans stupid. But I thought that in some ways Bill Maher did a better job in that clip than a lot of the anchors on the Sunday morning news analysis shows do, pinning down a guest on, he finally got S.E. Cupp to say, yes, at least for this particular moment, Republicans are more hypocritical than Democrats on like switching positions when it's a Republican as president instead of Democrat as president. And there was at least some polling data, to the extent you trust the Pew Research polling data, which I think is, fairly statistically accurate, at least when done in the United States, which is a distinction I draw for reasons I discussed earlier. But I thought that was a great clip about consistency and false equivalency and hypocrisy. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. Now I have actually a couple clips of Democrats talking about the resistance before I get to a clip at the end where Bill Maher fulfills his promise to take on liberals, where he talks about the liberal resistance in Berkeley and how he thinks they are anti-free speech, which that'll be the last clip. But first I have Bernie Sanders and Nancy Pelosi talking about how they think the Democrats should resist Trump. First, Nancy Pelosi talking, she kind of dodges the question of whether Democrats need to be pro-choice. And I think part of the problem is the terminology pro-choice versus pro-life, which I will discuss after we watch this clip from, this is NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd talking about some problems that developed when Bernie Sanders went on this tour with Tom Perez, the head of the Democratic National Committee. I talked about that a little bit last week with a clip from Bernie Sanders. Well, there were some hiccups along the way that Chuck Todd mentions, and then I'm also going to show Bernie Sanders talking about these same hiccups about pro-choice versus pro-life when he was on CBS's Face the Nation. But this is Nancy Pelosi on NBC over here.
Sort of the state of the Democratic Party now. I think there's obviously, it depends on where you sit on the Georgia result, on whether it's a good thing or a bad thing for the party. But let me ask you this. Is the energy inside the Democratic Party a bit overstated if Jon Ossoff gets the same number that Hillary Clinton got in that district?
No, not at all. Hillary Clinton is a very famous person running for president of the United States in a high-profile election. Jon Ossoff ran and is running in an off-year election. Low turnout and the rest. The enthusiasm for him, the young man, Georgetown, 2009. We're very proud of that. And really just someone who has attracted personally such support. He made a remarkable showing. It's about him and the commitment he has made to the people of that district.
Let me ask you,
I feel very confident.
What should unify the Democratic Party? What should make somebody a Democrat and not a Democrat? And I ask it in this way. There's been a lot of back and forth, especially among abortion rights activists, about a decision of the Democratic Party to support a candidate for mayor in Omaha, a Democrat, who happens to be pro-life. And there are some that, and at some point, the Democratic National Committee chairman actually had to put out the following statement after 3 days of back and forth. He said, I fundamentally disagree with Heath Mellow's personal beliefs, the candidate for Omaha mayor, about women's reproductive health. It is a promising step that the candidate now shares the Democratic Party's position on women's fundamental rights. Each candidate who runs as a Democrat should do the same, because every woman should be able to make her own health choices, period. Can you be a Democrat?
Why don't you interview Tom Perez?
Let me ask you this, but can you be a Democrat and the support of the Democratic Party if you're pro-life?
Of course. Of course. I have served for many years in Congress with members who have not shared my very positive, my family would say, aggressive position on promoting a woman's right to choose. But what you asked at the first part of the question before you went off was about what unifies Democrats. And what unifies, people say to me all the time, oh, you do such a good job unifying the House Democrats. I say, I don't. Our values unify us. We are unified with our commitment to America's working families, about job creation, about budget policies that invest in the future, good paying jobs. And that's what we'd like to see a debate on vis-a-vis the President of the United States. He promised jobs. Right. Show us the jobs. Where's his infrastructure bill? There are many promises made, promises broken. And here's the thing. Where's the infrastructure bill? President was supposed to have a strong infrastructure bill coming. The infrastructure bill is one of the biggest secrets in Washington, D.C., second only to the president's not showing us his tax returns. We need to see those so we can see how his tax policy will affect his own tax situation. We need to see them so we can see what is the hold that the Russians have on him politically, financially, and personally. So this is about job creation, job creation for the middle class and working families who aspire to it. That is what unifies Democrats.
Very quickly, I want to show.
So, I thought Nancy Pelosi, the House Minority Leader, pretty much dodged that issue. I mean, she kind of answered it when she said that not all Democrats have to have her aggressive stance in favor of a woman's right to choose. But, I mean, it's okay to be pro-life and be a Democratic legislator as long as you don't want to impose your pro-life views on other people. And so you can be pro-life as long as you're not anti-choice, and that's why I think it's a real problem to make it like pro-life versus pro-choice. You know, if you're personally pro-life and you're a woman, that means you get to choose life if you end up being pregnant. If you're personally pro-life and you're a man, well, then you get to try to convince people who are pregnant not to have abortions, I guess, maybe. But if you are pro-life, that doesn't mean that you should be imposing those. I mean, I think the right of women to choose what to do with their own bodies is pretty fundamental to the Democratic Party, or it's not something I think should be, reproductive justice, that, that's fundamental in so many different ways. And one of the things I think Bernie Sanders did wrong this last week is he kind of made that different from economic justice. I've been promising to make this video for a long time on this Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner, about how economics is anti-feminist, and that's one of the ways that I think women have been economically disadvantaged for so long because of the whole idea that they have to bear children if they become pregnant. That in some ways there's some ways that they're considered property for a long time, and there are some vestiges of that. And anyway, I thought that Nancy Pelosi could have made a stronger argument, and I thought Bernie Sanders, in his interview on CBS's Face the Nation, did a better job both of talking about these economic issues and then talking about the importance of being pro-choice, although I don't think he really did that great a job of showing how they're connected, which is a mistake he made earlier in the week, as I just discussed. And this is the last Democrat I want to show before my final clip, which is Bill Maher and S.E. Cupp talking about Ann Coulter being denied a speaking spot in Berkeley. But anyway, here's Democrats' talking points on economic issues according to Bernie Sanders, and then whether pro-choice is mandatory on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
I think what is clear to anyone who looks at where the Democratic Party today is that the model of the Democratic Party is failing. We have a Republican president who ran as a candidate, as the most unpopular candidate in modern history of this country. Republicans control the House, the Senate, 2/3 of governor's chairs. And in the last 8 years, they have picked up 900 legislative seats. Clearly, the Democratic Party has got to change. And in my view, what it has got to become is a grassroots party, a party which makes decisions from the bottom on up, a party which is more dependent on small donations than large donations, a party, John, that speaks to the pain of the working class in this country. Middle class is shrinking. 43 million people living in poverty. Almost all new income and wealth is going to the top 1%. People can't afford to send their kids to college. They can't afford child care. They can't afford health care. The Democratic Party has got to take the lead, rally people, young people, working people, stand up to the billionaire class. And when we do that, you're going to see voter turnout swell. You're going to see people coming in and running for office. You're going to see Democrats regain control of the United States Congress.
one of the things at debate, as Democrats try to fix the party, is this question of should there be a prioritization? You've put those populist economic issues at the forefront. One of the reasons there's a bit of a debate about the Omaha candidate for mayor is that he is against abortion rights. And so there's a debate about cultural issues versus economic. How does the party sort all that out?
I don't think there's much of a debate about that. I have 100% lifetime pro-choice voting record. Overwhelming majority of Democrats are pro-choice. I'm going to do everything that I can to see that the Republicans do not get away with their horrific effort to defund Planned Parenthood, which provides health care to 2.5 million women. But if we are going to become a 50-state party, if you're going to go to Omaha, Nebraska, which has a Republican governor, 2 Republican senators, all Republican congresspeople, Republican legislature, you know what? And if in Omaha 5,000 or 6,000 people come out to a rally led by Jane Cleave, their new Democratic chairperson who's doing a great job, and if you have a rally in which you have the labor movement and environmentalists and Native Americans and the African American community and the Latino community coming together saying, we want this guy to become our next mayor. Should I reject going there to Omaha? I don't think so. It was a great rally, and I hope very much he wins. And by the way, his opponent, the incumbent mayor, is also, of course, anti-choice, and she is inviting Scott Walker, one of the most reactionary anti-choice governors, anti-labor governors, anti-education governors, to campaign for her. The choice is clear, and I hope very much the Democratic candidate there wins.
All right, Senator, we're going to keep this conversation going.
So, like I said before I showed the clip, I think Bernie Sanders did a better job than Nancy Pelosi of arguing as to why a pro-choice stance, especially in terms of imposing you shouldn't be allowed to impose your pro-life personal beliefs on other people. You can hold pro-life personal beliefs, but it shouldn't be the government-imposed policy. And then around the edges a little bit, he explained why the whole Omaha mayor's race was a place where Democrats should support the Democrat over the much more anti-choice Republican. But I don't know, you can let me know what you think down in the comment section about that whole pro-choice issue. I think I discussed it enough between the 2 clips. And like I promised, I'm going to show one last clip, although actually I think I'm going to add a bonus clip at the end for the Sandy fans. Sandy showed up and started to turn around and relax and listen to the end of the show, so I'll have a bonus 7-second Sandy clip at the end. But before I get to that, here's Real Time with Bill Maher from HBO last Friday, talking about Bill Maher's friend Ann Coulter, who he says he likes her personally but disagrees with everything she says, that she was disinvited from speaking to the college Republicans, I think, at UC Berkeley. And Bill Maher claims it's evidence that liberals aren't in favor of free speech. And I think there's some problem with this analysis, although I don't completely disagree with it, as I will discuss with you after we watch that last clip of the program, other than the bonus Sandy clip at the end that I will show after we watch this clip together here.
But before we run out of time, an issue that's always near and dear to my heart, the First Amendment, because Ann Coulter ran into a little problem this week. I know, we don't like Ann Coulter's views.
You do.
I like her as a person.
Yeah,
I never agreed with one thing she ever said. That's different. Okay, but I was the speaker at Berkeley a couple of years ago, and they disinvited me, and then they got their act together, and I wound up doing it, and apparently that's what's going to happen with her, I think. But Berkeley, used to be the cradle of free speech, and now it's just the cradle for fucking babies who don't. And I feel like, this goes on all over the country on campuses. They invite someone to speak who's not exactly what liberals want to hear, and they want to shut her down. I feel like this is the liberals' version of book burning.
Yeah.
And it's got to stop. Howard Dean tweeted today about this. Hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. Yes, it is. Threats are not protected by the First Amendment. This is why the Supreme Court said the Nazis could march in Skokie. They're a hateful bunch. but that's what the First Amendment means. It doesn't mean just shut up and agree with me.
I can't believe you have to remind liberals of
I
this.
can't believe it either.
It's a shame because liberals are creating a fantasy land on college campuses that does not exist in the real world.
Right.
In the real world, there are no safe spaces where you can go and no one will offend you. Life is offensive.
Especially
I'm
at Fox
daily.
News.
Right. Well, right.
You worked at Fox News, right?
I did.
Bill O'Reilly must have done something.
Look, if
Oh, come on. Fox News is the Catholic Church at this point. I mean, they're just covering up left and right. He must have said something.
I actually never met Bill O'Reilly when I was there. Didn't
And he
have
still
any
harassed you.
No. But it's not preparing students for the real world, which is offensive. Get used to
Right.
it, and better to figure out how to deal with that than pretend it doesn't exist and just go la 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 la.
So, that was the reference to Bill O'Reilly I promised at the beginning, which I'm not really going to discuss. But if you want me to make an edited produce video this week about the Bill O'Reilly resignation from Fox News, I've been thinking about doing that. Let me know down in the comment section. I may actually join the Bill O'Reilly podcast Prime membership so I can see what he says about the whole thing in his podcast tomorrow. You can let me know if that's worth doing. And as I promised, here's a quick 7-second clip of Sandy getting settled down for the broadcast here. And you can see there are some of those liberal viewer stickers are similar to the ones I may add to the Patreon feed if you want to become one of my patrons, like I talked about earlier. There's a link down in the video description for that. As for Bill Maher's analysis of free speech in Berkeley, I do agree with him that the police should be able to provide security, and I also certainly agree with him about Howard Dean being wrong that hate speech is not protected by the First Amendment. I don't know why he's blaming liberals who are protesting the Ann Coulter speech. That's also part of free speech, as long as it's not like a violent protest that gives a heckler's veto to the protesters, which I'm not sure it's the students who are responsible for that violent protest situation. I think they're these weird anarchists who show up when there are protests in Berkeley, and that's what the police are afraid of, but they should be able to provide the security. And anyway, that's my free speech analysis and agreement and disagreement with Bill Maher, and that's the end of the show. I really have to finish up here, but I appreciate all of you who showed up for the live show, who watched the recorded show, who support me through Patreon and Super Chat, and just giving me a thumbs up or supportive comments. And maybe I'll have a chance to make that edited produce video about the Bill O'Reilly resignation from Fox News, but whether I do or not, I will definitely be back next week for another edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup, where I'll pick out the best clips and spend all day Sunday coming up with the clips and the commentary, and hopefully I'll see you next week, or until then, I guess I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.